Welcome to the Industry Insights podcast on the Career Cafe. Our goal here is to help make work better for you by bringing you insights, career advice, and lessons learned by some of the industry's leading experts, executives, and entrepreneurs in the finance and supply chain industries. We discuss what works and what doesn't, so you can make better career decisions and achieve what you want in your career. And today, I have the Chief Procurement Officer of Coupa Software, Michael van Keulen. Michael, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me. It's always good to see you. And thank you for having me.
Well, I was keen to have you on this podcast going back to a lunch that we had. It's probably been a couple of years now where we were talking about your career. We were talking about skills in our careers. And you've always been a very giving individual. You've always been very quick on your feet as well. So I'm interested to get into many of the twists and turns that you've had in your career, some of the skills that you've picked up. But before we get into that, maybe for those, if they don't have the familiarity with your background, maybe just give the listeners a brief overview of your career story, kind of how you got to where you are.
Yeah, no, happy to share. And I do remember the lunch as well. So I originally born and raised in Amsterdam, in Holland. I always want to start off with that. It's kind of my legacy, and it kind of explains, kind of who I am, right? It's the Dutch are known for a lot of different things, and I think I do represent that pretty well. I started in finance, in consulting with Arthur Andersen. And so I really did a lot of finance work, finance transformation, the chart of accounting and all of that good stuff. And, noticed that Foot Locker, I guess, the first time implementing e-sourcing there, that I really started to have a certain passion and an appreciation for sourcing, procurement, supply chain. And we implemented e-sourcing there. And really started to notice that my finance background really set me up very well for that. And then moved to VF Corp, the parent company for North Face and Vans, Timberland, and 35 other brands or so. First in finance, but then very quickly started to ask questions around procurement. Was given the opportunity to set up the procurement function in EMEA. That went extremely well. All these brands never really leveraged the power of themselves together collectively, and really did a lot of interesting work there. And that ultimately got me into procurement transformation globally for VF. Moved my family to Greensboro, North Carolina. Lived there for a year and a half. Then get that phone call from a headhunter that said, "Hey, Lululemon is looking to transform procurement in Vancouver." I'm like, well, Vancouver is collectively and consistently in the top 3 in the world in terms of cities. And so we did that for 4.5 years, transformed procurement together with a group of people, of course, implemented Coupa. And then ultimately now I am the Chief Procurement Officer at the mothership, as I say. And I have the golden seat in procurement, which is leading procurement for the best procurement company in the world.
You got to watch those calls from those headhunters, hey?
Yeah, occasionally be careful what might be the rem. Because originally I remember I said, no, I'm good at VF, and then ultimately did take on the challenge. Right. It's brought me to where I am today. So very, very grateful.
I'm interested to something that you said earlier when you started out in the accounting and finance world. Did you know much about procurement and the world of procurement before that?
Not a thing. I also say that 15 years ago, procurement was very, very different than it is today. Especially coming out of, what has happened over the past, year and a little bit now, right, with COVID and disruption in supply chain and companies, and we might get into that a little bit later, but really where the profession has just taken a completely different turn for the in a good way, right? We are now at the table, we are important, people listen to us. But 15 years ago, people thought of procurement as just a bunch of people buying some stuff somewhere in the basement. And I think those days are behind us. But back then, right, I said was, hey, there's no real rhyme or reason why a certain supplier is introduced into our ecosystem other than maybe some relation that existed with some executive at a previous company. And so there was no real vetting, strategicness, long-term, 3-5 years out. It was mostly very short-term, very tactical. And that's where procurement has, of course, now taken a completely different position.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you recall at that point in your career, were you looking for something different, or was there something about the situation that drew you to it and said, hey, I'm going to pursue this as a career? And was it a conscious career move, or was it, hey, I'm going to try something new?
No, I'd be lying to say that it was a real deliberate, intentional, planned career choice to.
Right.
I don't necessarily think that careers work like that. It was right time, right place. I took my finance hat on and I said, hey, I'm going to just run an analytics on shopping bags. Shopping bags seems to come back into my career a few times. Looked at all the different brands that VF had and very methodically, with your finance brain, analyzed the spend. And we noticed that we had sometimes the same supplier for shopping bags for the North Face and Vans, same supplier, different pricing, exactly the same spec. Just right. A different print of the brand, right? And so I ran that for all the brands that we had in Europe. And I just quickly said, hey, if I can get all my pricing to the lowest, I could save $1 million. And I took that to the CFO and I said, hey, I think we have an opportunity here. And he's like, I think you're right. And so that was the first thing that we did. It's a true story, yeah. Shopping bag was the first thing that we did. And then we said, well, what about fixtures? What about hangers? What about mannequins? What about logistics? What about, we slowly, it was like peeling the onion. And then, we started to throw, millions of dollars of savings on the table. And that got some attention from other people at the corporate office to do this globally. And so what I took away from that is, just take matters in your own hands, right? I mean, if you sense there is something there, just put some meat behind it. And that has worked really well for me.
We've talked previously about mentors. Mm-hmm. And when you've made changes in your career, and I know you've been a mentor, you've been very generous with your time in helping others in their careers. Did you bounce these things off of someone at that point? And how have mentors fit into your career decision-making over the life of your career thus far?
Yeah, I've had lots of mentors or managers, or I don't really look at a manager as a manager in the traditional sense of telling me what to do and here are your 5 things and stay in your. I've had managers like that. Let's just say that didn't end very well.
Right.
I mean that just didn't work for me. So I look at a manager as a mentor, and so I've had lots of mentors that were that have given me trust. Have given me the support, allowed me to make mistakes, because I think that's really, really important to give you that opportunity to say, look, I have your back. If you mess something up, that's totally fine. As we say at Coupa, fail fast, move on. It's okay, because if you don't fail, then it means you're not pushing hard enough. It's like skiing, right? If you've never took a major tumble with skiing, you're probably not trying hard enough. So I really believe in that kind of partnership. The things that always resonated well with me, there was one leader who I still highly respect. He once said to me, you'll make more money between your 40th and your 50th than your 20th and your 40th. At the time when he said it, I was 26. And I didn't really understand what he was talking about. One, if I look back, it's true that I can say for sure I'm now 46. I've probably done better over the past 6 years than I did in the 20 years prior to that. But money aside, what he was trying to say there is make the right career choices. That's what I've always said to people on my team, and I'm sure some of them are going to listen and go like, oh, here he goes again. But it's make the right decisions, be patient, learn more in the job, stay in the job longer. Even if you think you're at the end of your runway, I'm sure there's always a little bit more you can get out of that. And that might get you to the next opportunity. So really take it a little bit further than maybe is at the surface. More importantly, don't chase job titles. I've never chased job titles in my entire career. Never. It's easy to say now I'm a C-level executive, as some people call it, but I mean I don't really care about that, honestly. But what I do care about is what do I do every day? What do I do? How do I show up? What value do I drive for my company? How do I support my team? How do I support my stakeholders? Am I creating more value every single day? And if you think like that, then you take yourself to levels that you didn't even think was possible. And I have lots of examples of people that I had the opportunity to support in my career in terms of being their manager that have actually done that. And that there's no bigger satisfaction than to see somebody that used to be part of my team now take on a bigger role, open up their own business, and I've had all of that happen. And I mean and I'm in touch with most people that were on my team. And so that makes me really, that gives me lots of satisfaction.
That's such valuable advice. And I'm glad that we're on that topic. The relationship between patience and progression. If progression's what you want in your career, and there seems to be an ever increasing velocity of a focus on progression and making moves, and maybe it isn't necessarily chasing a title, but the role of patience in your career. How do you believe that should fit into someone's decision-making process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always start by encouraging, and I've had a lot of these conversations with people that didn't report to me per se, right? That were not part of my team, and they would come to me and say, "Hey, Michael, I've noticed that the people on your team, they're progressing, they're learning, they're having fun while they're at it. What advice can you give me?" And I always say, first and foremost is put yourself into where am I going to be 3 to 5 years down the road? And that feels maybe a little bit further out, but I'd say first think about what do you want to achieve? What are your goals? Where do you see yourself? Is it maybe you want to manage a team, or you maybe want to pivot your career, or maybe, and then try to break it down in digestible pieces of, so that it becomes achievable. That's not like it feels like it's this pie in the sky and you're never going to get there. So really try to break that down, and then give yourself the patience, the time to go and do that in your existing role. Because a lot of people think oh, I'm never going to get there. But I'm like, no, but if you break it down, because there might be things that you need to work on. Maybe it's your delivery, maybe it's your knowledge, maybe it's the way you network, maybe it's all of those three, right? And set yourself up for that trajectory. And then do regular checks back when you wrote that plan to make sure that you're on track, right? That you're not and if you've made a sideway somewhere, maybe that's the new path. I mean, don't let yourself just be blocked by what you're writing down for 3-5 years. So that's what I would say from a patient standpoint. And then progression, you do need to find points in that trajectory, in that journey, that you say am I continuously learning more things? Am I progressing? Am I teaching myself new skills? Am I still with the right leader? Do I have a leader that supports me? And do I have the right ecosystem around me? What's my network? When is all those things matter. And it's not just one. I don't have a one silver bullet that says, well, if you do these 5 things, then you're going to get there. I just say you got to write it down. You got to be mindful about it. Don't let that now be, written in stone. It has to be fluid, but you do need to kind of have regular checkpoints in your career. Are you still on the right track? And if you're not, then what am I doing about it? Because please don't think ever, this may be the one piece that I want all your listeners to take away. Don't expect someone else to do it for you. It's not going to happen. Never. Control your own destiny.
Right? Absolutely.
And so
that's great.
I hope that makes sense.
That you're right. No one is going to do it for you. It is up to you. And it's one of those things that's very difficult because you're not taught how to do it. You've got to figure your way through that. And it's interesting that we're talking about, when I use the term career management and career planning. So I think you can engage in career planning without having a linear plan, but there still needs to be a framework or a structure that you're utilizing to help get you to where you want to go. And it sounds like you've done some of those things in your career.
Yeah, and when you say career planning, it almost makes me cringe a little bit. But I know what you mean with career planning, because we've known each other for a long period of time, and I know that what you're not saying is you got to be super. But yeah, you do need to think about okay, well, what do I want to achieve? That's what life is all about, right? It's raise the bar, and if you feel like you've accomplished something, okay, well, let's raise it again, and let's not be complacent. Let's not, unless you want to be. That's okay too. It's not, you don't always have to be but if you do, control that. You can control a lot of what we just talked about. It's in your own control, and the only one that's gonna sell yourself short is yourself. I'm not sure if that makes,
Absolutely.
but like, I mean, you control a lot of that. So own it. Don't make up excuses, right? Oh, it's this so and so, or I got this guy here. It's like that's what people do. Oh, it's this. No, own it.
Let's talk about skills, because we work in our jobs. Our jobs require certain skills, a set of skills. What you're talking about from a career perspective, sometimes you have to tap into other skills that are outside of what you would typically use in your job. Have you found that for you? And what would be some of those skills that would apply to managing your career effectively that might not necessarily be present in your job?
That's a great. That's why I love that we didn't really pre-script this, right? Or we didn't really rehearse this. I love it. Look, I think we are not maybe naturally programmed, or we naturally don't think about bringing things like empathy, patience, or trust, or those are not necessarily things that you would bring to the workspace naturally, right? Very quickly thinking in terms of like, I got to achieve all these things, and we're very task oriented, and we're very, especially if you're in supply chain procurement like I am, we're very much like focused on like getting shit done, if you will. And sometimes it's better if you take a step back and you open yourself up to maybe use more of your softer skills, emotional intelligence. And I had to teach myself to do that. Yeah, that didn't come naturally. And so I'm thinking of things like EQ. That is, again, it's not something that's naturally for someone like me, for sure. Yeah, I am, like empathy is not something that comes natural for me. So I had to train myself to be more empathetic. You still want to be authentic. You still want to be yourself. Yeah, you don't ever want to lose and throw away your authenticity, because that's the one thing that you'll have forever. But emotional intelligence, empathy, understanding who you're interacting with, trying to convince and influence other people's perspective and opinions, that becomes more important, especially as you continue to progress in your career and you potentially take on bigger jobs. You very quickly learn that it's not always black and white, which again, right. Finance procurement very often thinks debit credit, right? We're not marketeers, right? And so to do that, the last thing that I will say is don't be afraid to get some scars along the way. Don't be afraid to, my opinion is, especially in supply chain procurement, but just in general, I do believe that, some scars along the way are you should be proud of those, and they come with the territory.
Helps develop character.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's not a one size fits all. I believe you do have to try some things, and it's almost that right brain, left brain piece of things where we get so stuck in doing our jobs and what works on a day-to-day basis in our jobs, and then you're pulling back from that and looking at things from a larger perspective. They don't necessarily just map right over. You're right. A lot of times they're more of those intangible, softer things that can really hold someone back, especially the further they get into their career. Yeah. Right. So really valuable advice.
Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to share, Jeremy, if I may, is ambiguity is another one that I had to like it kind of in that whole vein that you just kind of said there. Ambiguity, having the ability to deal with ambiguity. And get surpassed that, right? And that's not easy. Trust me, that's not easy, because for a lot of people it gets personal.
So let's talk a little bit more about that then. So how have you learned how to deal with that ambiguity? As an entrepreneur, it every day that's a part of the existence. So how have you learned to deal with ambiguity? I mean, it's for someone to hear that's one thing, to actually develop the skill of being able to deal with that. What are some things you've done?
Yeah, it's. I think the first thing that has worked always well for me is asking the right questions, and that maybe sounds easy, but just really put yourself in the shoes of whomever you're interacting with, and understanding their world and showing that you understand their world, and this is another thing I had to learn, is don't listen with the intent to respond, but listen with the intent to listen, right? It's very
Yes.
different, right? And I had to, I probably until I was maybe in my late 30s, I always was listening to someone already in my brain thinking, and I'm going to respond in this way. And if you do that, you're not listening to whomever is having a conversation with you. But also, again, authenticity becomes really important in that ambiguity conversation. Like if somebody has a completely different goal that they are trying to achieve than what I'm trying to achieve, then first and foremost, it's important that I have the ability to resonate with that individual. And there's training out there on the web that you can. It's all free of charge. It's how do you resonate with whomever you're interacting with. And it's about trying to potentially, if you're if you're having a conversation with somebody who is very creative, very visionary, you don't want to go in there and go like, okay, and here are the 5 things we're going to do, and bang, 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 because that person is just going to stop listening to you, right? And so I think it's really important that you understand your audience,
Yes.
and to maybe slow down, to speed up. Maybe it's better to not immediately come up with like the 5 bullet points out of this meeting, but maybe more, hey, let's talk about big picture. Let's talk about 5 years out and how we're going to get there. And then slowly reel that person in. Like everybody, and if you have that ability, and I'm still learning every day, but if you have the ability to do that, now you can resonate with a lot of different people. And that from a again, if you think about career development, it is super critical.
The ability to deal with people. I mean, I think a lot of people look at the technical skill sets required to get into an industry or the prerequisites for a job. How much have you found that your career success has been due to your ability to deal with people versus, and it may not be a versus relationship, but you've got dealing with people and you've got the technical aspects of your job. A lot of the things that you just described with empathy and dealing with ambiguity, asking questions and being in touch with your surroundings, that a lot of that's dealing with people, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it is about people. That's why I would say it's about people, process, technology, always. But it's people first, then it's process, then it's technology. That doesn't mean you can't do all 3 at the same time but yeah, it is about people, process, technology. I've been fortunate enough that I've been able to build most of the teams that I got to manage. So that was quite fortunate. In my current role is probably the first time where I came in and there was a team already in place. And we are gelling really well together, and I'm very, very happy and fortunate with that. But in most of my other roles, I had the ability to hire, and that's when you have that ability to really put people first and to really think about like, okay, what do I need in my team? And that's when, if you think about it from a hiring perspective, where you think about things like diversity, not just in diversity in gender or ethnicity or, those things. I know they are all important, but it's also background, education, experience. I've hired people, if you talk about EQ, I hired people from the help desk at Lululemon, right?
Yeah.
And why you hire them is maybe not because they know a lot about procurement, but what they do know is how to ask the right questions, right? Go ahead.
You wrote about this. You wrote an article in February. Procurement needs a new operating model, and you talked about part 2, talent. You talked about the skills and where talent can come from, and I'll link to this in the show notes. You also talked about hiring. I mean, some of the things you have in here, the changing skills of procurement, diversity. That was the first thing you just talked about. Natural curiosity, emotional intelligence, project management, and then digital fluency. I did want to touch on that as well, because that cuts across so many business functions. Someone who's listening to this who is, who hasn't quite grasp that piece of things. Why is that digital fluency such an important thing these days? I mean, you work for a software company, so educate us.
I happen to work for a company that knows a thing or two about how to manage business spending in a digital environment. But let's not turn it into a Coupa sales pitch. But look, I think where it's going is the power of artificial intelligence and RPA is, I mean, it's already there, and it's only going to get more powerful. If you look at, what a company like Coupa does, it takes a bunch of data from, we now have more than 2,000 customers, and we manage $2.3 trillion worth of spend. We anonymize that, and we actually allow our entire community to leverage that data and define what best practice looks like, right? That is
amazing.
Right. And now your platform, because we're all on the same platform, it now prescribes to you where you have opportunity to get better and better and better as you start managing more and more spend. 10 years from now, I like to think like 10 years, 5 years from now, just imagine where that is. And you need to have the ability to appreciate and understand what the power of AI and RPA is going to do to the profession of procurement. I love procurement. I will forever be in procurement, is what that data is going to do for us. And if you have the ability to translate that into real measurable value, then I think that procurement is, at this point, is the best career choice you can make. I really believe that. But you need to have the ability to translate, just to answer your question on digital fluency, to have the ability to take all that data and turn it into something that is measurable and meaningful for the company you work for. And those two things, they are interconnected. And if you have the ability to do that, then I think that you're on the right track.
Powerful thing. And that I think is a component. Would you agree? I mean, that ability to do that is, again, it cuts across business function. It's not just procurement. No. It enables you to, from a career perspective, enables you to go in a lot of different areas with that as a part of your skill set.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And now there's a couple of areas that I want to touch on, but one is, so within your space, some of the changes that are occurring, a lot of organizations are still working on procurement transformation projects. There's a lot of organizations, and depending on where you are in Canada versus the UK or the US, perhaps a little bit different. But the ability for someone who's working on, because some of the people listening to this will be procurement professionals working on a procurement transformation project. We talked previously about the different stakeholders in an organization. If procurement isn't viewed as being at the table, as they say, and I reflect back to the early days, you started out in accounting, that skill set to talk the language of the CFO or the CIO or some other chief executive in the business, the ability to speak that language, how much does that impact procurement's ability to transform or get something done in an organization?
Yeah, that's a very deep, good question. Look, you just mentioned 3 executives. They all have a different agenda.
Yes.
The CIO's agenda is very different than the CFO, than the CEO, and then maybe, another chief, HR, or they all have different metrics. They all have a different agenda that ideally, by the power of the CEO, somewhere along the line resonates and aligns to the strategy of the company. But what's really important is that I understand, and we in procurement understand, that if you're talking to a CFO, they're going to think about the value that procurement brings very, very differently than if you're talking to somebody who is the CIO. So have your talk tracks, is what I always say. When you're talking to a CIO, they're going to care about things like data, governance, protection of the data. How easy is it to interface and integrate within my ecosystem? Is it going to simplify? What does it mean for my people? That's typically what comes up there. Maybe if you've got a forward-thinking CIO, adoption levels or whatever I'm implementing, you'll be surprised that a lot of CIOs still today even don't necessarily think about, hey, whatever I'm doing, does that actually resonate with my business, right? A lot of CIOs still even today are not thinking like that, and they should, in my opinion. The CFOs, they typically think about savings, return on investment, working capital improvement, shareholder value, and things of that nature. They're very much programmed. So if I show up there and talk about more value or better quality or reduction in risk even, and I wrote about risk not so long ago as well, that doesn't resonate really well. Even risk, right? Because how do you price risk? Quantifying risk is very, very challenging. Typically, you know what the prices of risk. When something happens, now you're screwed. And then you realize, that decision we made 2 years ago to go with a lower cost supplier, that was not a good idea, right? Because they just out of business. And that's why they were so competitive, because they were trying to buy the market, for example, right? Or maybe they were single sourced in some factory in Cambodia where all Lululemon shopping bags came from 5 years ago, right? And so my point is, like, the CFO thinks very differently. The business, they think about resonating with the audience, with their consumers, with, I don't know, scale, maybe competitive advantage. Talk about that. That's procurement can do that all day long. And so that's my point is just that. Resonating with your audience is super critical in a transformation, whether it's procurement transformation. I don't necessarily am a big fan of procurement, like the word transformation, because that immediately makes it sound so big. At the end of the day, how do we drive more value? Right. What it is.
The underlying message there is to be able, if I'm correct or catching this correctly, is being able to speak a language, knowing your audience, being able to speak in terms of something that means something to them. That, how does one who's perhaps mid-career go about, and maybe it's not even mid-career, but go about picking up that ability to have that talk track? You have to sit and think about that. You can't just walk into somebody's office and expect to resonate with the CIO or the CFO or the CHRO or whatever. Yeah. You have to have thought about what's important to that individual. That takes skill to do that. How would someone go about developing that skill? Or those skills to be able to develop that talk track?
Yeah, it's like me, Michael, what is your favorite TV show? Then I would say How It's Made. And the reason why I say that, and I think you and I, Jeremy, talked about this before, and some people know this from me. Yeah? And the reason why I like that show is because it makes you think about how is something made? Like how does something come together? And the reason why I think that it's so relevant for us in procurement and supply chain, that's exactly what our job is, right? Is how do I turn something into something that creates more value, that accelerates the strategic objectives, that gets me to some sort of set of outcomes faster, better, cheaper, more efficient, better quality, better lead time. I mean, we're programmed like that. And so what I would highly encourage somebody in mid-career procurement is develop that natural curiosity, do your homework. If you do that, like I've walked into the CFO of a Fortune 300 and I said to him, I know more about spend than you do, right? Now, if you do that to a CFO of a Fortune, and it's not about me, I'm just kind of giving you a concrete example. Yeah. The first reaction was, what are you talking about? I'm the CFO, like, who are you, right? I said, well, I know more about our spend than you do, and I'll prove it to you. And so I picked a spend category and I just said, how much you think we spend on this specific spend category? And the reality is he had no idea. I said, but I do, right? I think like that. You don't. You think in matter of general ledger, account reconciliation, 10K, audit, compliance, like I said, which is great. I mean, I'm not undermining the importance of finance. That is super critical in any company. But I know more about spend than you do. Right. And so my point is resonate, because that resonated really well. It's like, wow, that's interesting. How much do we spend with office supplies? How much do we spend? Right. I'll get right back to you. I'll tell you.
But you knew the items that would resonate with him, understanding before you even go down that road. And I think this applies not just to procurement. We use the term transformation, but just your audience and being able to navigate in your current. Know your audience. Spend something that it's amazing to me that pretty much anything that we want to learn about today, we can go and learn it. We can be self-taught and become very knowledgeable in a relatively short period of time just by taking the initiative to learn something.
No, Jeremy, 100% agree. And then what I would say is use your network. Use your network. Don't only use your network when you're looking for another job.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's one of the, if I can go on a slight little rant here, I think that's one of the biggest career mistakes that people make, is that when they look for a job, they start networking. And I liken it to looking for a doctor when you're sick. That's the worst time you want to be doing it. You want to be, it's building that network. I call it community. I believe that there's 4 C's of career management, and one of them is building community.
Absolutely.
And the cumulative effect that one can have over the life of their career is astounding. If every month, every week, you do a little bit of work on your career for you, don't work in your career, work on your career, and it's exactly what you just said. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And if I can then take it on to an even further pivot, there is work on your own branding. Do not make the mistake that the only reason why people know you is because of the company you work for today. You have to, not with the intent to leave your current employer. That's not my point. But you have to work on your own branding. It is really important.
Because you own it. It's 100% portable.
Exactly.
A lot of times individuals will work in an organization and they'll build goodwill within the walls of that organization. The more that we can do to build goodwill outside of the walls of your organization that extends into other organizations in your sector, your industry, the more versatility and adaptable we become. And it really puts us in control from a career perspective.
And it's good for the company to work for today, right? I mean, there is something in it. Like, I want the folks on my team, the team that I get to support every single day of the week, I want them to have their own brand. And it's good for them, but it's also good for the company I work for, right?
Helps them become more effective at what they do for you while they're on your team.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Last thing I want to talk about here is that, Michael van Keulen, the human being. You've got a family and kids and all that kind of, and you manage your health. You're very conscious that way as well. How do you? It's been tough over the course of the last year and a bit, hasn't it? How have you approached those components, work versus life versus just staying grounded and all those things?
No, it's a great question. You should ask my wife, because she reminds me every day that I am not very good at this. So I'll happily admit that I may be, my balance is not great today. And it's something that I need to get better at. So I'm not gonna, I just want to give you an authentic, right? I said, like, authenticity. The challenge right now is you wake up in the morning, there's no commute, right? There's no commute. I used to, get on the bus. I would go to downtown Vancouver, and that give me a chance to maybe, like, reset or whatever. You go on a walk with a colleague to talk about something for a coffee, or there's none of that. So you often sit behind your desk, Zoom after Zoom after Zoom. So what I try to do is to book time in my day to have lunch. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes not, but I try to. We have 3 children, so they by default, require time and attention, which is good. But it's tough. I'm not gonna lie, right? It's very, very difficult to find the separation between work and personal time, and I don't have a good answer. I know I should get better. Is what I would probably say.
It's a challenge for probably everybody. In my experience, but you're right, because it can get very difficult to fit it all, especially if you've got young kids. That is a real time demand. If we prioritize it and try and fit it in early, in cases I've seen that work. But there's 3 things that if we don't watch what we put in our mouth, we don't get enough sleep, and we don't exercise to take care of ourselves. And it doesn't need to be a lot. It can have a huge effect. And I think there's a couple of other things on this subject as we bring this to a close. Is it's subjective. What's balanced for you might not be balanced for me.
Yeah.
So there is a subjectivity there in terms of tolerances as to how hard someone can go and how long that they can go, because we kind of go in sprints as well. We can have, because it won't be this way all the time. Yeah. But if you understand, okay, if there, it's over the aggregate, and sometimes you're going to have to, run sprints. It's okay as long as you're consciously going into that. and making room for it. But yeah, it's a challenge for sure. But we only get one body, we only get one shot at this, so we got to try
and what I will say is, out of all those things, my wife always reminds me that the number one medication is food. Healthy food. That does not, and so we put a lot of time and energy, especially my wife, into what we put in our mouth. And I do get to do some things with the kids that could be considered exercise, like I play soccer with my son and whatever, but I try, but I am having a hard time finding the right balance.
Well, career is very difficult to look at on its own. Career is one element of our lives. There's an interrelationship between all of those different components that make us a human. And there's an emotional component, there's a financial component. Career is one of those items. So it's a challenge regardless of what level you're at. You've done very well in your career. You've been very generous with your time, Michael. I know the listeners are going to have a number of things to reflect on and walk away from this episode. Really appreciate the insight and the time that you spent with us.
No, thank you. Hope it's relevant for your audience. And I always enjoy talking to you, Jeremy. So thank you for having me on.